Buddy, and welcome back to another installment of Com 201 Online with your host, Carl Brown. Coming to you today from the beautiful Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, because why not? The plan for today is just to talk to you about the first three chapters in the course pack. And I've put together a PowerPoint, which will be available, of course, and this video that you're watching now will obviously be up. So, what I recommend that you do is to get out your course pack with the notes, from the lecture, and follow along with that. So these two things, the PowerPoint and the Word document, sort of go hand in hand. And again, as always, if you hear dogs or children, sorry. All right, let's get to it. So, let me move things around just a little bit. I know this isn't the ideal way to show you all this, but it is what it is. So, chapter one, just an introduction. What I'd like to do is have this class have a theme, and the theme is think nationally, act practically. And what you're going to be doing here is identifying an issue that you see that really causes a problem for you. You're going to talk about that issue in an informative way, just to let us know what's going on with it, what the current state of the issue is. And then you're going to problematize it later and tell us why the issue is a problem, who it's a problem for, how impactful this problem is. And then later, of course, you'll tell us how to solve that problem with your final persuasive or your last two persuasive speeches. So if you look at the course pack, you'll see here that I'll use an example of regardless of your political leanings, um, we can agree America's currently not in a good position. This was actually written before COVID-19. So the hard left thinks the president works for Russia. The hard right thinks that there's a deep state trying to bring down the president. No matter what side you're on, though, you know that we're not in the greatest of shape. And so with that one, you could pick either side that you feel is correct and try to persuade us to join you on that side. For the informative, you can just talk about here are the differences between the left and the right. But the key thing I want you to remember from this is that I want you to be able to apply this to us, to this audience in this course. Well, first of all, why should we care about this topic? How does it affect us? Is it a problem for us? If it's not, you probably want a different issue. If it is, then you could use it and you'll want to really bring it home for us. Give us some details on why it's a problem, how it's a problem. Also, later tell us how we can help you solve it. What can we actually do? Not in the future, but now to start making a difference with this. So, the one thing that I've added here is to avoid COVID-19. Just as a direct topic. I mean, this is so right now that it would be very difficult to come up with a speech that was thorough. There's things that we don't know, so there's no point in doing it right now. However, what you might talk about, if you want to, again, not required, is sort of how this pandemic has highlighted other problems that exist. And the example I have there is inequity in education via access to the internet. And what I mean there is universities largely switched to online learning like we are doing right now, but very few ask the students if that was acceptable to them, if that was possible for them. And so what we have found is there are several students, specifically lower income students, for example, who may not have reliable access to the internet. They would rely on the school itself being on campus, which they paid for part of their tuition to be on the internet. And so for those folks, it's not as easy as it is for everyone else. So maybe you could talk about that being an issue and how we can address it. Again, that's just an example of how you can still touch on something that's current with COVID, but not talk about the actual virus itself. Now, I've got a list of quotations here, just some that I really enjoy. The first one is what I've got here, the way these are set up. The first line of each is something that I've heard in class before. I don't really care about politics. Well, in reality, the personal is political. Anything that affects you on a personal level, somewhere up the chain, came from a political decision, more or less. Now, there are some exceptions, but if you're thinking about, oh, well, I have to work 2 jobs, why? Because there was a political decision that affected what kind of money that you need and what kind of money you can make. If you are dealing with health issues, maybe the political decision didn't cause your health issues, but it did dictate how you will deal with those issues, what resources you will have available. So the personal is political. Everybody cares about politics, whether they know it or not. The next one is, I'm just one person, so what's the point? JFK told us one person can make a difference and everyone should try. So even if the problem seems too big just for you, that's fine. It's not just you. That's why you're relating it back to us so that we can help. Some folks will say it's impossible to change the system. If you're a Bernie supporter, you may feel this way right now. Now, I'm not picking on any Bernie supporters. I feel like those folks said it is possible to change the system. But now that they've tried twice and Bernie hasn't been the nominee, they might think, man, what's the point? And Nelson Mandela said it always seems impossible until it's done. Next up, you must be dreaming if you think that will happen. These things that will never change because we've always done them a certain way. Well, Harriet Tubman in her lifetime, things had always been a certain way, and that's that slavery was legal in America. And she says that each dream begins with a dreamer. So we have to be able to envision this new future, this new situation we want to see in order to make it real. Other folks say, I'll do something later. Now's not the time. They'll cite, well, I'm just a college student, or, I don't have any money, or I can't travel to the place and help the people because I'm, here. Martin Luther King Jr. told us it's always the right time to do what is right. Whether that's something big, something small, doesn't matter. And then last but not least, I don't like it, but it's not my place to change it. Again, passing the buck, really, letting that go to someone else. So instead of actively working against or for something, you just stay quiet about it. And Leonard Peltier said, silence, they say, is the voice of complicity. But silence is impossible. Silence screams. So what he's saying there is, if you don't do anything, you're actually working against change. So people will talk about the election coming up. We'll say, well, I don't like Trump, but I don't like Biden either, so I'm just not going to vote. Well, if change is a new president, then by not voting, you're remaining silent, which is in turn supporting the current situation or the current president. That's just the way logic works. So, again, for this course, identify, explore, and discuss a problem or an issue facing America. You see it down there at the bottom. Propose a solution to that problem, and then focus on how this audience is impacted and what we can do to change it. So it can be any global, national, large-scale issue, but you'll want to bring it home to us, and that's definitely something that's doable. If you have concerns about making this happen, let me know, and we will talk about it. Now, as I go back over here, I'm catching up on the PowerPoint, so here's what should have been up. One thing that I'll say over here on the PowerPoint is that we often call this speaking for social change. We'll identify something we want to change. There are courses called Speaking for Social Change. But when you're trying to figure out a topic, you may have a little trouble. Ask yourself these 2 questions. What is near to your heart? In other words, what do you really care about? And the way to really figure that out might be the second question. What topics give you a visceral reaction? In other words, when you hear someone talk about something, whatever it is, whether it's something related to the president, or if it's the environment, is it healthcare, whatever it might be, that you get that feeling in your stomach of feeling a little ill, or you immediately feel your temperament change. It makes you angry, it makes you sad, that kind of thing, or it makes you happy for that matter. And then you can tell us we should do more of it. That's fine too. So ask yourself those questions, and that might help you land on a particular topic. All right, next up is public speaking empowerment. And when you think about empowerment, it's a buzzword. People will say, well, lots of things are empowering. And they're right. For some folks, exercise is empowering. They feel more confident and ready to go because they exercise. Religion is empowering for folks. Some people get their concealed carry permit and feel empowered. Other folks get a great education and they think, man, I'm smart, I'm empowered. So, what I mean by buzzword or buzz term is that people really just throw this around without thinking about it too much. And to me, that's a bit of a problem. And I've always felt that way. So, as someone who studies public speaking, I wanted to understand more about public speaking empowerment and what that might mean. So, I kind of gave it away already. One scholar created the Brown Public Speaking Empowerment Scale. Spoiler alert, that's me. So, after doing a lot of research on different ways that different disciplines define empowerment, I mean, I looked at medicine, I looked at business, psychology. I came away with these three themes that seem to be repeating. And when you're empowered, you feel an increase in your confidence, you feel more able to influence other people, and you feel more personal agency, or you feel more in control of your own actions. So, for us, through this class, I want you to become a more empowered speaker. I want you to feel your confidence boost, because instead of thinking, I don't know if I can do this, you'll know now that you have done this. You've seen yourself succeed before. How will that impact your confidence? I want you to feel like you're more influential. Later in the semester, we will talk about Monroe's motivated sequence. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, to me, that is the most effective persuasive tool that we have. And so being able to apply that in different contexts, different situations in your life, hopefully will give you a new tool that will make you feel like you're able to influence other, and make that feeling increase. Last on this is agency. And the way I discuss this in terms of public speaking is that we've all been in a situation where we've probably seen something happen and we thought, wow, someone needs to say something about that. But we didn't say anything about it. We said something external. Well, through this idea of agency, I hope that in the future, when we are in these situations and we see something, that we are the ones that will speak up if it's needed. I don't want everyone to just go off on everyone around them all the time, but in those unique, rare situations where we feel moved to say something, I want you to be able to do that. And that sort of is a result of the confidence and influence boost. So taken together, this measures your empowerment. There's lots of different things that go into making up these variables. And if you look over on the PowerPoint, you can see a few of them. In your course pack, there is a copy of the Public Speaking Empowerment Scale. And so what I would ask that you do is, I'm going to scroll down to it here. Go down here, and I don't care if you copy and paste it or whatever you want to do. I mean, you can do it sort of like that if you want. Before you do that, though, come down and answer your these questions or respond to these items. Really, it's a do you strongly agree? Do you strongly disagree to strongly agree on the 5-point Likert scale? But if you do that, then you can sort of just come in here and highlight, and that would work for what we need. So, whoops, I'll get it back. Or you can change the font color. It doesn't matter. Whatever works best for you, as long as it's clear which one of these you selected, go for it. And that's how I will know what your answer was. So with that one, you'll see a spot to post that survey. It might be easiest to copy it, paste it into a Word document, fill it out, save the Word document, and post it in the discussion forum. So that's something that you can do. And you'll also do the PRCA 24, which I will talk about in a few minutes. Now, a lot of folks ask this question: why do I have to take speech class? What's the point here? Well, I know it's required for most of you, but there is a lot of value in taking a public speaking course. Now, I know that's my opinion as the guy who studies speech, but let me make the case for it here. First of all, humans are natural storytellers. before we were able to write things down and educate in a more formal academic way that we know now, we would tell stories to pass knowledge. I mean, a classic example would be, a group of people, a small tribe, maybe living in primitive times, and they lived in one location, and the river was, a mile away, and they had to go to the river to get water in order to survive. Well, there were 4 or 5 different ways you could get to the river, but over time they figured the best way. And how did they figure that out? Well, people would take the trip and they would come back and they would tell them how challenging it was or how easy it was, or they wouldn't come back. And that's probably a good indication that you shouldn't go that way. So, we have always been storytellers. There's a unique, I guess, a cultural history of this in America. There's still a group in Jonesboro, Tennessee, that's the National Storytellers Association. And, they're more of the, artsy storytelling folks, but it's still based in the same tradition. You can go back and think about public speaking and think about the ancient Egyptians. A lot of folks think that public speaking started with the Greeks or the Romans, but it didn't. This goes back to ancient Egyptian times. I mean, you had a pharaoh who people worshipped as God, and you got to wonder, how did the pharaoh convince the people that he was a god and should be worshipped? He told them, right? So this is public speaking, early. Then, of course, we get into the more familiar Greek and Roman history, and we'll talk about Socrates and Isocrates, and a lot of Roman speakers. So we're not going to get into a historic perspective necessarily, but know that this goes back, and it's some of the stuff that we'll learn here. It comes all the way back to the Greeks. Now, when you think more recent history and the power that words have, there's a lot of examples. I mean, you can think in a negative way about Hitler. Hitler was an awful person, and just nothing that any of us should aspire to be. But he was a very good communicator to those who wanted to listen, to the people who he had manipulated. He was able to connect with them. Now, that's not giving him any credit as a great persuader. That's not what he did. He manipulated and coerced people, but then he would use words to do that. And, the power of words there caused a genocide. And it's unbelievable how a series of speeches led to what we know as the Holocaust. I mean, there was I know if you're a history buff, you're going to correct me on this, but the short version, the easy explanation version for speech is there was a financial problem in the country. Hitler comes to power. He says, I'm going to look into this. I'll figure out what's going on. Great. A couple days later, whatever time period it was, he comes back and says, I'm looking into this and it looks like the problem's with the banks. Great. Third speech. I've looked into the banks and the banks are not being responsible with your money. Oh, by the way, it looks like most of them are run by Jewish people. So I'm going to look into that. Fourth speech. So I've been looking into these banks and the Jewish people who run them, and they are stealing from Germany and they need to be stopped. I'm going to look into that. Fifth speech, the Jews are robbing us and we need to stop it. And then he started to get into the dehumanization, right? The rats, the rodents, that kind of thing. And that progression from, we're all just Germans, to they're a lower class that's trying to wreck our lives, is what happened through words to manipulate people into becoming killers. So words have a lot of power. Now, on an upswing, you can think about Dr. King. The most famous speech that most of us have ever heard of is the I Have a Dream speech. Now, to me and most other scholars who study this, we agree that is the greatest speech that we ever have found a record of. So in other words, there may have been something just better from the Greeks, Romans, Egyptians. We don't know because there's not a recording of it. But Dr. King's speech is wonderful. Now, Dr. King used words to empower people, to motivate people, to inspire people. This is very different than the way that they were used by someone like Hitler. But nonetheless, those words, I have a dream, stick with us. And they stick with many Americans and inspire them to rise to greatness. Um, when you get into politics, whether you love either one of these presidents, Obama or Trump, it doesn't much matter. The thing that I'll focus on here is that President Obama, according to speech folks like me, is probably the best speaking president that we have ever had. At least, again, that we have a recording of. Ronald Reagan was actually pretty good in terms of giving speeches. President Obama was also great. I remember actually in, gosh, I'll date myself, 2004. President Obama, was it four? I think it was 2004. He gave the Democratic National Committee speech. That was the final big, keynote speech. And I was in I guess I lived in an apartment then with my then girlfriend, now wife. And we're watching this speech, and I'm just mesmerized by it. And as soon as he finished, I looked at her and I said, "That's the next president of the United States." And sure enough, that's what happened. Those words are powerful, and the delivery makes a big difference there. Now, on the flip side of that, President Trump, by standards that we normally use to evaluate speeches, Trump is an awful speaker. He doesn't continue thoughts all the way through. He stops and changes topics abruptly. His delivery when he is on a teleprompter or using notes is pitiful. He always stays looking down. But when he doesn't use a teleprompter or notes and he's talking to his supporters, he is in total control. It's very bizarre. It's something that I think folks in my field are studying right now to understand how this is so different from what we have always thought of as good speaking, but yet somehow so effective for a particular group of people. So words are big, and it depends on who they come from as to the impact they might have. But overall, they're still powerful. And you'll see that's the next point here, that words can be simple, just small phrases even, and they can continuously change your life. I mean, think about some 1 or 2 word phrases that might change your life forever. I love you. Will you marry me? I hate you. You're fired. It's terminal. You got the job. Those little phrases that can be literally life or death. Guilty, I sentenced you to death. Not guilty, you can go home. You were wrongfully convicted. Just little bitty things that can totally change life. Similarly, you've got things like trigger words. Trigger words are often slurs, but they don't have to be. A trigger word is anything that causes a big emotional response in a person when they hear a particular word. So obviously, if you hear someone use a slur that just really grates, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, when you hear it, that's going to be a trigger word. Now, some folks go beyond emotion, and when they hear a certain word, they might take a physical action. I've been in a class once, my first semester I taught, where a student used the R word pretty frequently. And this is 2005, 2006. So, it was still used more than it should have been. However, in the back of the room was a very large, muscular fella who, had a brother who died with Down syndrome. And, little did we didn't know that until one day the guy got up and slapped the other guy. I mean, he actually slammed his face down into the table. And when the smoke cleared, and when the police investigated, they found out that that's what had happened. This guy, the R word was his trigger because he had heard it used against his brother, and he had had enough. So trigger words can be serious in that sense. They can also be like my wife. Her trigger word is moist, right? I don't know. I live to a lot of people, but make a cake or something. It doesn't be anything dirty, and it'll just be, this is very moist, and she just shudders. So, it can be different for different people, but that just speaks to the power that words have in our lives. Big news in small packages. That goes back to the first thing I was saying with those short phrases. And then last here, relationships. I mean, this is huge. We'll talk more about it in a minute, but relationships, often start with Words. You ask someone out, or you move from one level of a relationship to another, these sorts of things. We do those with words. Now, the next item here is that words package points of view. That's from linguist Noam Chomsky, sociologist, social linguist, I suppose. And the examples there: racism, sexism, intelligent, kind. What I mean there is that you don't have to run around with a Klan outfit on, burning a cross with a rebel flag for people to know you're a racist. We usually don't see that anymore, thank God, unless you're in Charlottesville. Okay. But we can tell when people are racist by the words that they use. So that's that words package your points of view. So when you hear someone say racist things, whether that's a slur or a derogatory comment or a degrading comment, or saying that a particular person who's a member of a particular ethnicity can't do something because of that ethnicity, well, they're telling you they're a racist. We don't need to see physical evidence of it. We hear it and we know it. Same thing with someone who is sexist, right? Most sexists now aren't actively, running around grabbing people. Well, maybe the president, but that sort of stuff. It doesn't happen as much as it used to. However, using simple language, using derogatory terms again against women, or could even be against men in some cases anyway. Just men don't get anything. They're animals, that sort of stuff. I mean, it goes both ways with sexism. So saying those types of words, using that language, lets others that are listening know you're a sexist. They don't need that clear physical example. Same thing. If someone's very smart, you know that because they say intelligent things. If someone's very kind, you know that because they say nice things. And the opposite is also true. We use words, trying to change it over here. We use words to transfer knowledge. We do this right now. We tell stories that let other people learn, just like the which way do we get to the river with that path. So whichever way had the easiest way to go, then that's the new route. That's the one we will take, and that transferred knowledge to the rest of that tribe. Same thing, when your parents or your grandparents would tell you stories about when they were kids and something that happened and what they learned from it. That's what they're doing. They're continuing that storytelling tradition that transfers knowledge. Next up, words have the power to change attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and values. Now, with this one, I think it's important to understand that for us in this class, we're really just trying to change attitudes. I mean, if you think of it, attitudes are the easiest thing to change because they are on the surface of humans. So, for example, as I record this, I'm drinking a Cherry Coke Zero, and that's my soft drink of choice. But if someone were to tell me, actually, there's a lot of bad things in there, and here's an alternative that doesn't have those bad things, and it tastes very similar, well, you know what? My attitude about Coke Zero would change. Now, I know that some of that information's already out there, but if I was presented a clear case directly, I might change my attitude, which would then lead to changing my behaviors. It would change what kind of drinks I buy. But as far as my beliefs go, I still believe that Coke Zero is the better tasting product, but it's not as good for me. And then values, if someone said you can never drink soft drinks again because you're destroying your body and you should only drink water and natural juices, that's a value position that you would take. And that's going to be tough to convince me of. I really can't see that drinking one soft drink a day or one every 2 days is going to be detrimental to your health. So, again, we need words to convey these items. Going back briefly to the idea of changing beliefs and values with words. If you think beliefs, you may think religious beliefs. And if we had a guest speaker come in who was a religion that none of us are, and they told us why all the other religions were wrong and why theirs was right, and they did this in 1 hour, I don't think anybody would be ready to make a switch right away. So while we might be able to change an attitude in a single speech or two, Changing these deeper things, the beliefs, the values, those take more time. And that goes back to that Hitler example. It wasn't one speech, it was a series. It was um, a manipulative, longitudinal, over time sort of process. All right. Words have the power to make and break relationships. Yep. You think about this one. If you've ever been in a relationship, I imagine you will understand this. Now, I'm going to add in here, while I'm thinking about it, an example here. Let's go actually up to romantic relationship and do this. Simple question. Whoops. What's wrong? Simple answer. Nothing. Now, if you've been in a relationship, you already know where this is going to go. But here, let me set the scene for you. If you are, you walk into a place where your significant other is, maybe they're at home and they're watching TV, and they just sort of have this look on their face, the look. And you ask this simple question: "Hey, what's wrong?" The answer comes back as nothing. Based on how that word is said, it could mean tons of different things, and it could also be the difference of you understanding that meaning could be the difference between you being in that relationship or not by the end of the conversation. So when you think about it, just on three levels. Somebody, you walk in and somebody has the look, you say, "What's wrong?" And they say nothing like this: "Oh, nothing." Maybe that's true. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe they were just sort of zoned out for a second. Let's say you come in and you say, "What's wrong?" And you get this sort of sound: "Oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it." "Oh, really? Really? Don't worry about that." Yeah, you should probably worry about that. That means something is wrong, and either I don't want to talk about it, or more probable is I do want to talk about it, and I want you to ask me multiple times to talk about it so that I see that you care about me, and then we can move forward instead of just getting there anyway. We've probably been in that situation. Another option might be, "Hey, what's wrong?" "Nothing." Oh, yeah, something's wrong, and you probably did it. But again, if you had the same response to all those as you had to the first one, where you just were like, "Oh, okay, great," and then walked away, boy, your relationship isn't going to work out. So, in all sets of these relationships, families, friendships, romantic, professional, we use words to connect with people and to pull away from people. So that is another reason words are powerful. Now, there are some similarities and differences between normal conversations and public speaking. Similarities are that you still need to have some sort of organized thought. You want to adapt your message to an audience. Some people will think, "I don't do that when I have a conversation." Oh, yeah, you do. I know none of you would do it, but let's say one of your friends, right, was out way too late. They wake up hungover, and their mom calls to say hi. Well, when they talk to their mom, they're probably, some might, but many won't tell them all the details. They'll just say, "No, I really don't feel well today. I have a headache and I'm a little nauseous." They won't get into the other stuff. But if their best friend calls and checks on them, they adapt that message, and they'll say things like, "Oh my gosh, dude, I drank way too much last night. I don't even remember leaving the bar, blah, 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 blah." Right? So again, we change up a message, we adapt it based on who that audience is. We often also tell a story for maximum impact. Again, in that same example, if you just focus on the symptoms you're having to your mom, then the maximum impact you're looking for is for her to not ask too many questions and to feel sorry for you. When you're talking to your best friend, you want to get across maybe just how wild and crazy your night was. And so that's the impact you want. And in both cases, you adapt to feedback. If you see that the story isn't going exactly the way you thought it would, you're going to change how you're telling it if someone seems confused or they change the topic, for example. So we always do some things in both public speaking and general conversations. However, there are differences as well. So what are some of those? Well, One is that while conversations are organized, usually, speaking is highly structured. You're going to use outlines. You're going to really put things together in a purposeful way that tries to accomplish your goal. So, first of all, you need to identify a goal. That's small talk, for example, really usually doesn't have a goal unless it's, you know, cutting down some awkwardness. But we'll have very clear goals, very clear approaches. Also, in public speaking, we're going to make very careful language choices, or at least we should. So instead of saying, I know a lot of people that feel this way. A lot. How many do you know that feel that way? You're going to find that number. Or, I hear they say that. That's a pet peeve of mine. Well, I hear they say that. Who are they? What did they say? How do you know that's what they say? Where did they get their information? Again, these are things that you'll address in a speech. Last, speaking requires more of a focus on delivery than general conversations. Again, you don't need to pretend or simulate speaking to royalty or something like that while you're giving a presentation. And we'll talk more about finding the happy medium between too relaxed and too uptight. But your delivery matters. The way that you pause, the way that you pronounce words, the way that you hold yourself. So we'll get into those things, but they do matter. Now, some very specific ethical considerations is that first, your message must be ethical, and you can think about this in a couple different ways. My favorite example is, 10 years ago, I had a student in Tennessee who asked me if, for a demonstration speech we were doing, a how-to speech, could he give a speech on how to roll the perfect blunt? and and I thought about it for a second. I said no, and he said, "Oh man, I thought you were cool." And I was like, "No, no, no. Here's the deal. Why don't you give us a speech on how to roll the perfect cigar at home?" Now, you don't need to focus so much on what's inside of that cigar, but you're going to tell us how to roll your own cigars in an effective way. And that's what he did. So I couldn't let him say, here's how you do something that's illegal, at least at the time in the place. But I could work with him, you know? And that kind of gets to being creative. And that goes with the next item here is that you must be honest. Again, you can't give false information to try to win an argument, especially knowingly give false information. I had a student once who was talking about vaccines, and she was an anti-vaccine person. And at the time, the hot topic in vaccine world was the Gardasil vaccine, and that it can cause problems and all this. So she said in her speech that when you go to the doctor to get one of these, which you shouldn't do in her opinion, they give you the shot if you're a woman in your vagina. That was her claim. You could see the confused looks in the room, and then when question and answer time came around, hands just went in the air. Like every woman in the room's hand went up, and they weren't ready to just attack her and call her out for lying. They were concerned. They said, who is your doctor? I think they're abusing you. That's not how my doctor did it at all. And so what her point was, and she said this later, which, hey, I kind of respect that she came clean. She said, I knew that a lot of folks are fans of vaccines, and I needed to come up with something that would help me convince them otherwise. And so she lied. And, that's not ethical. Something else that's not ethical is attacking individual people and not their policies or their views. We'll call that later an ad hominem fallacy. But for now, know that in order to have an ethical argument, an ethical position in a speech, you can't name call. You can't go after someone's personal life. You need to really focus on the issue at hand. That's sort of with both Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. They both had affairs. And so people would often point to that, though, and say, well, they both had this one had this affair, this one had that affair. And I can see why that might make your ability to trust either one of them a little lessened. But when you're talking about things like who's going to make the best decision about the welfare system. Well, that one had an affair. That doesn't seem to apply. So focus on the issues. Next to last in this section, the free speech versus consequence free speech. There is such a thing as free speech in our country, but there is no thing, there's no such thing as consequence free speech. In other words have consequences. What we say is heard. It's often now recorded. And there are usually consequences to what we say. So while you may have the freedom to say something, it doesn't make it the right or the smart thing to say. And then last but not least, avoid plagiarism of all types. Big thing here is don't go and pull information from other studies without citing it, or rip off other speeches and speakers without giving them their due. All right, last thing in this section here. Oh, sorry, I need to come back here. I'll move through this quickly. What I'll tell you is that there are 3 reasons you'll ever give a speech. One is to inform people, one is to persuade people, and the other is to entertain. In reality, most of these are blended together in almost every speech. I mean, think about it. You paint a picture of reality. Here's what's going on. You're persuasive in your take on it. And then hopefully on some level you're entertaining. That's not necessarily like you have to make people laugh, but your presentation itself, the delivery, will be something that people can, tolerate watching. There are 4 styles of delivery. There's manuscript, which is basically reading a speech. There's memorizing or memory speaking, which is just not reading it, not using any notes. There's impromptu, which has little to no preparation time. It's just, all right, give us a speech about the thing, go. And then there's extemporaneous, which is the closest to what we will use. For us, our version of extemporaneous speaking is sounding like you haven't practiced, but that you're an expert and that you didn't need to practice. But in reality, you've practiced to the point that you can sound that way. So, for example, if you have an expert on any topic come up and talk about his or her area of expertise, they usually don't need to prepare very much, if at all. I mean, for this kind of stuff, I usually just start giving the lecture. Now, I have notes that I'm keeping myself on track with, but as far as preparation goes, in the sense that you'll probably do it for this course, it doesn't find itself useful that much anymore. So what you'll want to do, since you're not an expert at your particular topic that you'll pick, more than likely, you will want to practice until you sound like it's all coming off the top of your head, because you know everything there is to know about this topic. And so that's sort of the way we'll approach being extemporaneous. All right. Importance of a specific purpose in choosing your style. You'll ask yourself these questions. What's your goal? Inform or persuade? Who's the audience? It's people in the class. What do they want or need to know? So then you can focus on what you should include in that speech and what you can leave out. And then what do they already know? And this goes back to the ethics idea, because if you come into a speech and start speaking as though everyone knows what you're talking about, you're not being ethical. You probably have had a professor at some point who did this. I'm thinking like, hard sciences or something, where they assume you have gained certain knowledge in a past course that you didn't gain. You don't know the background. And so they'll just come in and start speaking as though you do. That's what we want to avoid. We'll change up our language style to adapt to the audience and the audience's background knowledge of our topic. Okay, last but not least now, we've got the public speaking empowerment scale. You've seen that. And the next thing, because we're changing gears and we're going to the last item for this first week, and that is anxiety. And when you're thinking of anxiety, we're all nervous on some level, and I'll save some of that for that next part of this. But there is a thing called the PRCA 24, which is the Personal Report of Communication Apprehension, and there are 24 questions. And it is designed to figure out how nervous you are about communicating. Now, it measures group communication, bit like business or meeting communication, public speaking, that kind of stuff. It does a number of types of communication. For us, we're going to do the PRCA 6 in this case, because these are the 6 questions that apply to public speaking. And this is the second survey that you'll need to fill out and submit. So if you want to, and I actually recommend it, copy paste the public speaking empowerment scale, this one, then copy and paste this one into that same document, fill it out, and then submit it as one single document. That's going to be your easiest route to take. And this is, again, a strongly disagree to strongly agree. You just answer these questions. Now, we need to know how nervous you are so that we can prepare for it. And I am not going to get into anxiety much, but what I will tell you is that there is another video that you need to watch. It's another PowerPoint. So you can click a link here, or you can go back into the Blackboard site in our videos, and you can find the speech anxiety, nervous is normal speech, and you can follow along with these notes. So I will leave it there. Go watch the anxiety presentation, because the key thing I'll say you should take away from that is right here: knowing your symptoms. If you know your symptoms, you can prepare for them. And I give you examples of that. But if you don't think about it, you're not going to be as prepared. So go watch that one. Let me know if you have questions, and I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, I will talk to you next time.